Hello, this is Eric, aka Hello, this Justice is Blinded. Eric, aka Hello, this Justice is Blinded. Eric, and we are doing a video today with a special guest. We're going to talk a little bit about SAS and ARC values, but before we do that, mystery special guest on the line, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Z. I go by Zarathustra online. Big Z and Jim. I am a member of Team SAS and here to share some knowledge.
El Capitan, as a matter of fact.
Yes, that is. I am the team leader for Team SAS for organizational purpose.
Indeed.
Yep.
Indeed. So, thank you for joining us. And like I was saying in the intro, today we're going to talk about values and how to use decks of Keyforge to evaluate decks and what sort of things you look for when we are looking at all these different statistics that Nathan has up on the site and all of those lovely things. So, where would you like to start? Do you want to start with overall ratings, or do you want to jump into individual categories?
So for the most part, SAS is the big SAS number is that's a more complicated of a beast, and it's kind of imposing to some. If you kind of read through, it's there. It's well thought out and designed by Nathan or Corey Than, if you've seen him online. But for some of us, for some people, it's a little bit more complex than we're going to want to get into. So we're going to just talk about the arc and the value for most players that it can provide, because it's a very much more straightforward and direct number that you can kind of attach knowledge to, play experience to after 10 or so games, because it'll be a little bit more real to you than what the overall stat can be, which can come into play a little bit later, let's say after 200 games, right?
Right.
So the big one is A. I mean, that's the first one in the arc, and it's the first one for a reason. Amber is what forges our keys. We are about forging amber with our creatures, getting raw amber off our cards, so we can get that 6 amber, so we can forge a key on our step 1. Amber control is gonna be moving them off of them. It's called move them off check, move them off the key. The bigger that number, the more readily your deck's gonna move your opponent off key. So when you see an amber control number, it's not that exact number of cards. That's not exact. That's not how the A is generated, because some cards will be 0.5A and some will be 1.5A. So it's not, when you see 9A, it's not 9 cards in the deck that are going to do that, but it is going to give you a basis for how much A is in the deck. So for that to mean anything to you, you're going to need to have a good number of like what's high, what's low, what's really high, right? So here, that's what we can talk about. So if I see an A, really low A is going to be anything below 5. Below 5 is a deck that's going to have a very hard time moving your opponent off of key. And in many cases, if they forge 20 amber, they're going to win the game. You will not have been able to move them at the right time off of a key enough, and they're going to forge 3 keys real quick. Until you get to around 10, you're not really in a safe spot. 10's a pretty solid A number for most competitive decks. What that amount of A is allowing you to do is give you enough time to execute the win condition that you've identified in your competitive decks. We're really talking about it in a competitive sense, what these can do. So
just to clarify a little bit more, when you say A, we're talking about amber control. So examples of cards that would be like, so the deck we have pulled up here, this is Bombfoot. This is the
Bombfoot.
This is the deck, if memory serves, that Brooks ran in the Denver Vault Tour final, an Archon final. Brooks technically lost. Well, not technically. Brooks lost the match, but this deck won all 3 games, if memory serves, right?
Yes, it did. Yes. This deck is representing as one of the best decks in all of Denver. Get some audio commentary here. I'm trying to adjust my mic a little bit. We'll see if that helps. So this deck going all the way to the finals means it won every match on day 2 to get to the finals. The first match, Nathan lost with his also very similar to this deck, control style deck. And then the next match, let's see, Nathan won with this against his own match, and then they bid. Nathan bid 1 for this deck. Brooks let him have it, and then Nathan did end up beating his own deck with Bombfoot. So Bombfoot did win all 3 games, giving Nathan the victory. So this is representing Denver's top deck, because you don't randomly win 8 games in a row or whatever that is, right? So if we're looking at this, like if you hover over the A, we're going to see where all that comes from. An A of 9 is 1 shy of what I said as far as giving you the time. So let's talk about like where the rest of that time comes from, because there's a lot of nuance that goes into all of these. But as I said, 10A in most cases gives you enough time to execute your win condition. In this case, the extra time after that 9A is coming from control the weak, which is also this deck's win condition, because key charge, control the weak, some form of loop, some other stuff like scramble storm. These are all win conditions once you start playing really competitive, and that's a whole topic for another time. But A is about giving your deck enough time by preventing your opponent from forging so that you can execute whatever you've identified your own deck is good at as far as winning the game. Whether that just be forging the keys naturally in step 1, controlling the weak to open a forge window, key cheating directly, or some kind of crazy fun loop, right?
Right. And so in this particular deck, there are examples of different types of amber control. You have very obvious and straightforward types of amber control like bait and switch, which is one of it's still situational, but it's definitely something that has amber control built into the card itself. And then you have other examples of things that are classified under a like Murmook, which are static effects that just increase the cost of keys in a deck. The ratings give bait and switch a 2 in terms of A, and Murmook a half a point in terms of A. So it's a gradient of different different strengths or different qualities of A, if you will, and then it gives I think half a point of A to something like Ghostly Hand, and my understanding from how those ratings are determined is that you kind of try to expect how often they're going to hit and for how much. Yeah. Right, so you have a Ghostly Hand here that
to some extent, Nathan doesn't do below a fractional value of 0.5. So if I'm looking at Ghostly Hand in all sincerity, it is not going to be stealing 0.5. It's not that means you would be stealing. Every other Ghostly Hand is going to steal 1. That is not accurate. We all know that. We play the game. But the minimum value that can be assigned in the ARC is 0.5. So that is why you can't just look at an A and assume that's that many cards. Sometimes it's actually way more cards than that because of stuff like Ghostly Hand.
Right.
But for the most part, it ends up being pretty good, because if you scroll over to Schuler, like we're gonna get an A of probably 0.5, maybe 0.5, a 1.
Yeah. 0.5 is correct.
You got a 0.5 there, whereas this, from my play experience,
hits a lot more often.
It's gonna hit 75 to 80% of the time. So I mean, most of the time they end up washing out like that. Occasionally, you could end up with an A value of higher than it would perceive to be, but overall, the ARC is going to be fairly consistent in the way it's represented on the average of a deck.
Right. So for A's amber control, and you've said you like to see 10 at least in an ideal situation, but as is the case with this sort of deck, you can get away with less if you have other mechanisms, and we'll talk in a different video about deck archetypes and that sort of thing. But that's kind of any other comments on A before we move on to E?
All of these kind of have an interworking effect on other stuff. If you have a really big A, there's some other stuff that we'll talk about later you might not need as much. In fact, it leads us directly into the very next one. The next one in a lot of people's evaluation, I don't actually agree, but in most people's assessment, A is the most important, and then E is the second most important.
Hmm.
So the second most important is E. E is expected amber. So in a really rough estimation, what this is saying in a way is if I played all 36 cards in my deck through normal gameplay, I will achieve this amount of ember. Sometimes it's going to be higher than that. Sometimes it's going to be lower than that because the expected ember can fluctuate based on gameplay, of course. Reaping isn't exactly tied up in this either, so you probably will generate more than that amount of amber by going the turns through your deck because you're reaping as well. But that's just what your cards are expected to generate. So when I'm looking at E here, there's a lot of things that can allow your E to be lower, but what I'm generally looking for when I'm playing a competitive environment with a competitive deck is an E20 or higher. Because with an E20 of higher, you can reasonably expect your deck to start checking your opponent every other turn, starting in round 3 to 5, depending on your card draw. And checking your opponent every other turn is a huge deal. If you've played the game any amount of times, you've been in that scenario where your opponent is constantly putting you in check. And your deck is going to run out of answers eventually, even if you have the 10A. So that 20 or higher E is a big deal. If you have a bigger A, your E doesn't have to be as high because it gives you more time. Then you have stuff like this deck. This deck is by definition a form of rush deck because its E is 30.
Right.
If you get to 30, you're putting your opponent in check come turn 4 or 5 every turn.
Yeah, all the time.
Almost
Yes.
almost every turn you're putting them in check because you're generating a ton of amber unless they have some very specific forms of amber control that uh, functionally change your key
Like
cost.
Ether Spider, or I mean,
Yeah,
the
Ether Spider,
or
lots of grabber
right,
jammers, jammer
Jammer
pack,
packs. Yeah,
lash,
exactly. And the
the
and
rare obsidian, how did obelisk, the rare obelisk that
Obelisk. Yes.
actually works.
Yes. Pile
It's
of skulls in a very unique
Pile
deck.
of skulls can
Something.
work
Yeah.
very well
Yeah.
too. Like there's a lot of ways to really mess with E-Decks, which is why it's not as high on my evaluation as other people. But honestly, if you're going to evolve, if you're competing at the top levels, there are a lot of very good rush decks. They're easy to get your hands on and they're fun to play. So that's why A
Leads to more
is,
people playing them. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a fun mechanism. They burst out the door. Like I've seen people forge a key on their first turn with stuff like Fertility Chant, Dust Pixie,
Right.
another card,
Right.
and Key Charge. Like that's a fun start. And your opponent's sitting across from you, like, what? What just
That is,
happened? What do I
yes.
do
That is
now?
the reaction. Yes, and I mean, like you said, it just goes to illustrate why amber control is, whether it's the most important thing or the second most important thing. Regardless, amber, having a high level of amber control is good, and you also want to generally, if you're trying to get a competitive Archon deck, you
Yeah.
want to try to spread you want to find decks to spread, like as if you have a choice.
Hmm.
You want to try to find a deck where your amber control is spread out amongst the houses, so that you're not forced into a situation where your amber control is all in one house or even all in two
Yeah.
houses, and then um, you're forced to make decisions in the game that aren't necessarily otherwise your best choice. Right? You're forced to make suboptimal choices if you have to do that in order to go to the amber control. You don't want to be in a situation where you have like two choices. One is to board develop and do a lot of things that are going to really help
Hmm.
you try to
Yeah.
win the game, and the other is like take them off check for their second key. And you don't like being put in that position. You want to have enough amber control spread amongst the houses
Yeah.
that you can choose the house you want to call and also have some amber control. So that is pretty important as well.
Yeah,
um,
one of the things he's talking about is what I call a deck hole. So my second deck I ever opened is a very good deck. I got it all the way to power level 3. But when it came to actually like competing in a vault or some top online competitions, I kept running into this problem, and that problem was like my disc set was amazing. My shadow set was probably the best steel combination you could have, and then I had a logo set which was really fun. It had library access, a bunch of stuff that can push the deck, but zero A inside library access. So I'd be in these games where you knew this check 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 situation. At
right.
some point I would have to call logos, and that is a losing scenario for me.
Right,
So
and
if you
then
have a
like if
deck
the price
hole,
right, if the price of calling a different house is that you are basically handing over a key, that's a
yeah,
big price to be paying.
yeah, it is, and that's one of the things I've identified later in my play. Like that's, I mean, it took me a while to see that that's what is happening because like I won most of my games with that deck. It's still a great deck,
Right.
but when it comes down to it, like it's not gonna win a vault because you're gonna play other great decks too. And if you win in that check situation, you've already lost the game. You could sit there and play it out for another 10 minutes, but like the reality is, if it's 2-2 and you're gonna keep checking each other, eventually you're running out of cards, and you're gonna have to call that house that does not have A. And
Right.
I mean, you could get lucky in this scenario where you can just push high enough where they can't check you back, but like a lot of good decks are gonna have A,
Right.
the same amount that you have. So like that's a wash. So that's where we're at. Like with that, as far as that, I generally stay away from decks that don't. Or if I see a house that has absolute no A, they better have something else in that deck that's making them win really really fast for me to really consider it to play in top competition.
Right. Uh,
So that's where we're at with E. The next one I think is about to actually skyrocket in value. I wrote
yeah.
the article that we're kind of referencing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. It's on Decks of Keyforge. It's called Dark Arts, the Dark Arts of Deck Evaluation. But
Right.
like
Well,
I had this whole thing
plug
about how
we'll
important
plug that
artifact control is.
article. Feel free to go here. You can go
Yeah,
to articles are now under home. So if you go under home on the Dex Keyforge page, you'll find this article that Z's written that we're um, basically cribbing most of here, but also having a little bit of in-depth conversation.
dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, the crazy thing is, I wrote that. I had the date right there. That was March 27th, and some of it's actually more true now than when I wrote it.
No,
So, like, that's kind
it's definitely more true, especially what you're about to talk about.
yeah. So with artifact control, we have crazy amounts of artifacts that are about to hit the board in AOA. That if you don't have an answer to, you're playing a different kind of game, and I mean literally a different kind of game. Heart of the Forest is going to come out and totally shock some people. I don't know if you have an image of it ready, but it is an
I can
artifact
get one
that
in a second. Yeah.
says, I don't know the exact wording, but something to the effect: if you have more keys than your opponent forged, you cannot forge a key. So if you don't have a way, if I'm at 2 keys and my opponent's at 1 and they play that artifact, I cannot win the game
Here
until
you
they forge
go.
their second
Here is Heart
key.
of the Forest.
Here we go. Gives you an amber. It's an artifact location. Each player cannot forge keys while they have more forged keys than their opponent. So this says, if my opponent plays this and I'm at 2 keys, they're at 1. If my deck has no way to destroy this artifact, and they have any mechanism in their deck that can forge 2 keys on one turn, I probably just lost the game. I'm just gonna have to
Right.
sit there and
It's
watch for a while. I'm gonna play
just a matter of
cards.
you
I'm gonna
hanging out
smile at
for a
them.
few minutes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna like, hey, that's a cool card you got there on the table. Like, what am I gonna do here? It's like, oh, you have 2 key abductions in your deck somewhere. Well, let's see how that comes to be.
Right. Right. Then you're just betting the over under at that point. But
Yeah, I mean, maybe you have a way to give them amber to make them accidentally forge a key out of their cycle, but like, it's gonna be an interesting play. So like, well, a lot of what I'm saying about artifact control goes down to you need to have cards in your deck that answers artifacts in a severe way. Now, it used to be remote access was actually a legitimate answer, and Nexus used to be a legitimate answer because they could actually remove the most dangerous artifact in the game back in Coda, which was Nephthysy. We all know about lands now. We've
right.
all have answers in most of our competitive decks, so it's not a big deal. But the problem is, Heart of the Forest, Nexus is not an answer. Remote
Right.
access is not an answer.
Right.
Snudge is just a delay. So
Right. I mean that
you
that's
need hold.
so what you're talking about right now is there are different things that are like we said R stands for artifact control, and there are different things that contribute
Mhm.
to the R in different ways.
So this
Nexus,
is actually an example of the deck that might have a problem.
yes,
Bombfoot does not have a way
it
to
does.
destroy that
It
artifact.
doesn't have. It only has. It has three things that count for R in this deck. It is
Mhm.
Snudge, Nexus, and Grasping Vines. Grasping Vines, of course, simply pops the artifact to the hand, which doesn't do a single thing to Heart of the Forest, as an example, because they just could easily call Untamed and replay Heart of the Forest. Like, that doesn't.
Grasping Vines is an interesting answer to the Heart of the
It's
Forest idea.
it's a
If you have a
reason.
key
I
cheat.
was just gonna say that it's a reasonable
Yeah.
answer if you have a key cheat in Untamed. If you have
And in
Chota or
Bombfoot's
Key
case,
Charge.
Bombfoot does not have a key cheat.
No, it does not.
This one does have some options. I mean, if you snudge, pop it, and then control the weak, like that's something there.
Right.
Because obviously you would just not choose Untamed, so they can't replay the card. So I mean, we all know Bombfoot's a great deck. There are some answers here, but the other player knows to look for snudge too, right? So like,
Right.
the advantage is still in the Heart of the Forest player's hands.
Right. I'm
Um,
gonna find another another one of these. I'm sorting for PL 7 or 8 decks, so decks that have been in the
well, you
final.
stop right there. Go up, go up, go up.
You want a gasoline?
No, go up. Yeah, just stop.
Bahamut?
Right there on gasoline. This is an R of yep,
Oh,
back
gasoline.
down.
Sorry.
Yeah, gasoline.
Okay.
R of
You got
0. I play Heart of the Forest if gasoline's at 2 keys. There are very little options in this deck that is going to possibly yield a win. And in fact, if I get Ristring Guntus and Heart of the Forces does that, is that just what, draw? Like,
Well, no, because
this-
so this is an interesting conversation, and we
oh, actually, this deck would win if they did land the Restring, because then they would go to time.
right. Except that depending upon if both keys have the same amount, if both decks have the same amount of keys, then
Well, then they wouldn't, because then they could forge naturally. Like, so
Right.
the Heart of the Force only works when there's 2 to 1, or 1 to 0, or 2 to 0. Like, it has to be a key difference. for
right, it
the
only
other
works
person.
on time. But I mean, that's like doing the math on those. A lot more games are going to go to time in AOA, especially in AOA only formats, like in sealed AOA, like the Vault Tour Origins. You and I have already predicted that we're going to see maybe, I don't know, some insane percentage, insane compared to the current percentage.
Yeah,
of
like I
games go
almost
to
never
time.
see any games at Vault go to time. Occasionally, I'll see it at a local just because of newness. Players play
Right.
a little slower. I
Right.
mean, you have someone playing their 3rd or 4th time. I've never been. I'm not gonna say never. I think I saw one game go to time at the Vault last weekend, but that's one out of the probably 50 that I got to see.
Right.
But either way, R is huge, and it's not just so every time you see an R number, I don't generally field a competitive deck unless the R is 2. Eric, my buddy here, does field some decks that are lower than that. And
I
that's
have
kind
been
of,
known I have been known to perhaps unwisely field some decks that do not have R. Well, I'm just super good at opening and acquiring decks that have no R. So, I just got to lean into it sometimes. So I just pulled up a different random deck. This deck is a PL8 deck. I don't know what this is. I don't know what vault this won, because a PL8 means it won a vault. This might have won Chicago, but I doubt it. I think this must have won a. Was this Yaro's deck?
no.
Okay, so I don't know what vault this won. It could have won. This definitely wasn't Rachel's vault from the first Vault Tour in Europe. This wasn't.
Is this the deck that won Chicago?
This could be the deck that won Chicago. It would be weird if this was the deck that won Chicago, because this seems, while decent, not a fantastic deck.
Oh wait, is this Cavs deck?
Oh, this might be Cavs deck.
Oh, this is Cavs
Yep,
deck. I
never
saw
mind.
this play
Okay,
the other day.
that totally explains it. Yep, this is no, you're absolutely correct. So this is Cavs deck. Now, interestingly enough, no, actually,
Now, this is actually a really good
with the deck.
anti-AOA deck. Like, this is double Poltergeist.
That's why I pulled it up,
Got
because
too
I
much to protect.
Right.
Library access spaceship. Like, this has got a lot of tools.
I wanted to illustrate a competitive deck. This was in a sealed event, so that's why it's an 85 and under a 60 arc, and it's still winning a Vault Tour. It's because it was sealed. It's also because Cobb was playing it. Go back and watch the final. I was a commentator on that. It was a couple interesting things that happened during the final, but this is a good example of a deck that has 3R, but the R is all, I guess, can we call it hard R? Like, it's artifact destruction R, right? Yeah, so it's 2 Poltergeist. Poltergeist are going to be the new I guess there are other cards that do it. Like you could have Snack Lifter that steals the artifact, but
That does not help against the heart, though.
that's true unless you have a way to kill your own. Yeah, no. So Snack Lifter actually isn't a removal of that artifact either. So you're going to need Poltergeist is going to be at an absolute premium in
Mhm. There
in an
are
AOA
more hard
format.
IRs coming in AOA, so we
Yes.
will of course talk about that when it comes. And that's the only update to my article I actually need to make is include the AOA R, because there's some more hard R coming. But what's important to know is that I believe EMP Blast, which will have way more value against the AOA decks, is not in AOA itself.
I can confirm that for you. Just a second.
Last, he has all the lists ready.
I'm almost certain you're correct.
I'm pretty sure I checked that and I kind of giggled to myself. I was like, well, artifacts are way more powerful on average in this set, and the only card that removed all of them is gone.
Right.
So,
So like you're absolutely correct. EMP Blast is not an AOA. So obviously in an Archon event where you have both types of decks there, both
yeah,
expansions, both sets of decks there.
sets. I believe we're
Right,
calling them
sets. So
sets. Yeah,
um you'll see some EMP Blasts in the field.
yeah.
But
Because from what I'm predicting, the top meta decks coming out of AOA are going to be very artifact dependent. You're probably going to see some. What did I call the other? I call them margins decks. So Martian Generosity with Nepseed. Obviously, Seed is still in there, so that's an artifact that we're still going to need to look for. Martian's Generosity, if you guys haven't seen that yet, you lose all your Amber. It's a Mars card. For every Amber you lose, you draw 2 cards. That is an insane amount of draw. And hey, guys, Key Abduction's still in cycle. So, bam, out of
right
nowhere, your
here,
opponents can be forging 2 keys on you.
I got you. Martian Generosity right there.
Yeah, so think about this with Seed in play and 2 key abductions in your deck. And that's an uncommon. There are decks right now that have 3 key abductions. So that could just be straight up OTK out of nowhere. I think that's going to be coming. So Nepseed is still going to be a high priority in AOA, even though LA is gone. So if you were thinking that Fantasy Flight was going to do something to help out with seed shenanigans, well, that's not right.
Right, that's correct. The probably the best new artifact destruction is a new
And a funny
Mars
thing here
card.
before he moves on while he's finding it is this card gives you an amber that you then
Right,
lose to draw
right.
2
It's
cards.
an auto draw 2 cards in the worst case. The only there ex, except and unless your opponent specifically has Ether Spider on the table, it is automatically a draw 2 cards like
Yep.
spell. Can't
Mm-hmm.
be worse than that ever.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. I love Battlefleet, and this is actually better than Battlefleet. So we'll see. I'm definitely trying to get my hands on one of those decks.
So here is the new, probably best hard artifact control in
Mm-hmm.
AOA. It's the best new hard artifact control
It's
in it.
also very good to know that this is just an uncommon card. This is a double kill at least. The first and only card in the game to target an upgrade.
Yes, which is
Not sure how
interesting.
valuable
Well,
that is, but meh.
that's most likely just to be an added bonus situation.
Yeah.
Like on the rare situation where your opponent's playing a deck with something like Collar of Subordination, it's really silly because then you like take the card back. There's a new
Mhm.
Martian card that's an action that allows you to take a creature, and is not an upgrade to tack on the creature. Call Subordination is an upgrade. So there are like once in I don't know 100 times, probably even less commonly, that you play this card, you're gonna see like it blow up an important upgrade, but usually not. So this is one of the new.
There's a few important upgrades in the game, but yeah,
This is
you're
true.
right. This is not
So,
that many. I
but
mean,
you're
if you
really
can hit
playing,
an
yeah,
Armageddon cloak, that's great. If
right.
you can hit stuff like that, rocket
You're
boots maybe.
you're usually just hitting an important artifact and their best creature, which is still extremely good value for 1 card.
Yeah.
There is one other card in Untamed that's both
Before
better.
you flip the picture,
Yeah,
if you liked Independence Day, I do love the throwback to Independence Day when
the
they're blowing
art
up.
is yeah the art is
Yeah,
particularly
the art
nice.
is
They've
pretty
always had good
awesome.
art in these sets, which I really
Hmm.
appreciate.
Oh, I
Um,
think Mars has some of the best art. It's just it is
Definitely
what it
does.
is.
So this this is going to definitely be a thing. This is an
Yeah,
uncommon, sorry, this is an untamed creature at common that blows up artifacts. All it has to do is survive. Like, you have to play it. It has to survive, and
yeah,
then likely until the next turn, unless you have the new Dusk Witch in play, where every like and that survives a turn. But you have this has to play, and you have to find a target that it can fight into and survive the
yeah.
fight. But if you do that, it can continual artifact destruction with added bonuses on this card is pretty gross.
So this is something I haven't. I literally have not checked this, but is Way of the Wolf in cycle?
Way of the Wolf. Let me check.
Because if it is, this is actually a lot better than I think it is. If not, this is a hard thing to keep alive. Obviously, if they have elusive creatures, it's gold. But
Way
if
of the
they
Wolf is
don't,
not in cycle.
so that's a little rough for me. I'll see. I'm gonna spare judgment on whether I say this is good or bad, um, based on how it actually plays in
Well, I
person.
think it
Because
is probably Untame's only real artifact destruction, although I have to go
well,
back and
they had
confirm
none.
that.
They had no hard A before set,
Right.
so the
So like
only A
the fact that
R. I
the
mean
fact that they
R.
get any at all, any
Yeah.
R at
Before
all
this,
is it's a
yeah,
thing.
before this, all they had was Grasping Vines, and Grasping Vines is not hard A. It does actually help a little bit against a Heart of the Forest type thing, and it does help some against Nepseed decks. But in general, it's not gonna win you the day.
Right. Um so we kind of took a little bit of a detour there to talk about some of the more important considerations in R. In Coda, you didn't necessarily have to have hard R all the time. It was better. Poltergeist was almost always better in Coda, but you
And the
still
main reason because that is the most aggressive artifact, game-winning artifact. The only one that will really lose you the game
right
immediately was
seed
Nepseed,
right, and
and
so
Remote Access and Nexus were gold there. They
right,
were.
but that's
Hmm.
not going to be the case in a lot of matchups in AOA. So having things like Poltergeist is essential. So it's essential. So it's very important when you're looking at decks that you don't just look at the number in R.
Hmm.
You look at what the R is, right? Because you can have a
Yeah.
deck like we were just talking about. You can have a deck um, like Bombfoot, where
Yeah, like Bombfoot.
where you have it says it, there is an R of 2, but all of that R is using an artifact, which
It's
is
delay.
totally useless
It's all
against a lot.
delay. Hmm.
Right. It's either using an artifact, which actually is worse than popping it to hand with artifacts like the new ones in AOA. It's worse than popping it to hand because you can't use them. They're static effects, right? So Nexus
Hmm.
doesn't do anything against a lot of artifacts in AOA, and even popping them to hand isn't effective. So you got to look at what cards are in the R and not just the R itself.
Hmm.
Um,
So if I'm looking at R for a competitive deck, I'm generally looking for at least two, and then I scroll over it just like he's doing right now, and then make sure one of those cards is a card that will literally destroy the artifact.
right.
I used to just make sure it would. I used to count Snecklifter in there. I love Snecklifter, and I used to say it was the premium R card. But Heart of the Forest, like I'm gonna still put Snecklifter as my favorite and the best R card, but that might change if Heart of the Forest really is as good as I think it might be.
Yeah, I'm not
So
sure.
we'll see about in a month and a half. I could be wrong as far as like the top level AOA deck coming out and being these crazy Heart of the Forest locks. But if I'm not, Snecklifter might get bumped down, and Poltergeist and Destroy Them All might get bumped up immediately.
Yeah, and I mean, I think my instinct is that where you're going with that train of thought is almost certainly going to be correct, at least at the top levels of competition.
Hmm.
Archon tournaments, and even if they're big enough, like a Vault Tour main event sealed, like we'll see this. We're only a little over 2 weeks away from Origins, so you and I will
Hmm.
both be there, and we'll see whether or not this is true. But my instinct is there'll be enough decks in the room at Origins, because they have it set up where they can accommodate up to 200 people, two day ones of I think 100 people each is the cap. So if there
Hmm.
are 600 decks that they're opening from AOA, there are going to be some decks for sure where that new artifact is coming into play, and they have the deck got some stuff around it that uses it well. Some
Well,
key.
I'm hoping to draw one, and I'll let you know how that
Yeah,
works out.
yeah. Well, I'm sure that you will. But at least maybe I can get something reasonably decent when I'm on playing my day one. We'll see. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely going to happen, and I think that the people that don't have poltergeist or some way to protect that this Rustnar, like the Rustnar with some
Hmm.
protection, people that don't have cards like this are going to run into big problems.
So this isn't for this cast, but like for sealed, Rustnar, in my opinion, is very good. Period. There's no, I don't have to debate. I don't have to think about it. I think Rustnar in sealed AOA
Yeah,
is an amazing card because there's so many artifacts. We're just really talking about the top ones, but there are a bunch of great artifacts in AOA. And Rustnar and Sealed should get a good chance to take a whack at least one of them, and that could be literally be removing your opponent's win condition in AOA because
yeah,
there's a lot of great artifacts. Like there's Memory Chip, there's the Sanctum Proclamation, obviously there's Heart of the Force. Like these are great artifacts. They're not a little good; they're amazing. There's the Brobnar one that I don't know what it's called, but for every creature above 5 for both players, the opposing player's key cost goes up. Like that's ridiculous. Like so you need to get these artifacts off the board if you're expecting to beat some of those decks because they are that critical to them winning.
absolutely.
All right, what's next?
So next, I believe we'll go back to Bombfoot. Next, I believe is C. C being creature control.
So this actually comes a little bit more important than I originally evaluated it. So in my on my original evaluation, I was saying a 15 creature control score is about what you would expect if you're looking against a big board deck. And in my original evaluation, I said it was generally okay to be lower than that, because a lot of top end decks with good win conditions, you can afford to give up a little on that. 15 was the what I was going for, and I think that might actually hold more true if you're facing an AOA deck because AOAs are going to be bringing a little bit higher of a creature count, in my opinion. And the reason why I went with 15 is because there's some people that love to play big boards. Joe is one of Team SAS, and he loves the big board decks.
Mm-hmm.
If your opponent has a 20 creature deck, creature control of 15 is about where you need to deal with the constant. I'm playing 2 to 3 creatures
Well,
fairly regularly from hand, and they are going to matter.
and in
Uh,
AOA, you're going to run into a lot more decks where there's if when there's there are so there are cards in AOA, for example. Let me see if I can find one of them. But there's a card in AOA that requires. Okay, so here it is. It's called Little Raspgal. It's number 25. Let me put it up. So there is a card in AOA that requires you to fight this guy, right? So this is just an example, but there are a lot of effects in AOA that are going to force fighting. Some of these effects, like this thing, will force fighting if there are no other alternatives. So
mhm,
if you have a decent amount of creature control, if you're being forced to fight in order to get the easiest thing to handle this would just be to have creature control that can kill this thing,
mhm.
right? And then you don't have that problem. But if you
Yeah.
can't do that for some reason, like you don't have direct damage creature control, you're still going to want to have some level of creature control because you're going to want to make sure that the fights that you engage in are beneficial for your creatures. Creatures could trade up in fights if you have the right types of creatures, or if you have really big creatures, those can obviously fight more profitably. But if you have stuff that can wipe out different things on the board, then like if you can kill this thing, then all of a sudden your creatures can
Mhm.
maybe, I don't know, there's so much repaid in the set, but maybe they can reap again, right? So or do other things that are useful.
Well, this is also 2 ways, so like this affects you too, right? So, um, that's what I mean. Like big, like you're gonna see big boards when you're facing AOA. So the creature control score being a 15, like you don't necessarily need a 15 to establish your win con. I think if there is a critical, it's more critical to know what you don't want. If your creature control score is 7 or less, your deck has a problem. It's personal, like it's
Right.
independent win condition better be super fast and have nothing to do with creatures on board. And there are decks that do this.
So, and
But
this
if you
here's
have
I'm
a
going to give
creature
you
control,
yeah I'm
yeah,
going to give you an example
8K5
of that.
is rough.
This is rough, but this is the one that
Yeah.
that Rachel won the first Archon Vault Tour in Europe with, and the reason why is because it's a combo deck, right? Because
Yes.
it wins before two time
Good point.
travelers, key abduction, it wins before you care about boards. But
Yep.
unless you have something like this elite level of combo, I mean, you could see just scrolling down all of the power level 7 and 8 decks. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this deck was in a final.
20.
I don't know where,
20.
but where was this deck in a final?
I don't know. This looks like a vault deck, so
This
I'm
might be the deck that
guessing
Rachel played against. In
this was either in Chicago or
right, but this
where did
says
Rachel win? Nuremberg,
Eindhoven.
Eindhoven. This was either
Yes,
Eindhoven or Chicago's runner-up deck.
right. But you could see like creature control level of 20 is
Mm-hmm.
insane. Like it's
Well,
not
and then
so
that's what I
insane.
talked about earlier. So you've got the 7A, which is a little low, but you've got the 31E to make up for it with a huge creature control, which matches some of the stuff we've already talked about. The
Right,
0R is a little interesting. Obviously, that person didn't run up against a top seed deck.
right. And this could have been now see the problem is I should have remembered Selenaris. I think that was another. I think Selenaris might have been Iago's deck, but I'm not sure. Or not Iago, Yarrow.
What was the house combination?
Hold on, I will tell you. Logos Sanctum Untamed.
That was his deck.
Yeah, so that,
That's
that
good.
that was a sealed event, and again, a sealed event, at least in Coda sealed, you're much more likely to be able to get away. No, that
Mm-hmm.
was that. No, actually, this couldn't have been his deck, because oh wait,
No, that's
the
not
thing
it.
the thing keeps shifting. The whenever you move this thing, it shifts sometimes. It's fine. Anyway, so but yeah, you're more likely to be able to get away with a 0R situation in a Coda specific sealed format. But
Exactly.
that doesn't exist anymore. So
Nope.
you're gonna need some creature control anytime AOA is in the mix because there's a
Okay,
lot of
I think somewhere between 10 and 15 is where I will personally land on. Obviously, I will be playing against AOA decks with my decks. I'm thinking like 10 was generally where I settled on for a lot of my personal decks. Knowing that AOA is going to be in cycle and in vault soon, I'll probably be looking for stuff that's in the 12 to 13 range. Obviously, if it does hit 15, I'm going to feel pretty safe, even if they have big boards.
right. Okay, so then we move on to discussing our next variable, which is D, which is short for deck manipulation. Deck manipulation in the SAS rating system takes into account both the ability for you to draw cards or to cycle through your deck, either one of those things, quicker or more cards, faster cycling, and it also takes into effect the ability of your cards to disrupt your opponent's hand or their ability to draw. So things like Mind Barb, you can see gets a half a D here, and that's because you're plucking cards out of the opponent's hand, and other things like Grasping Vines because you're disrupting the what would be the how would you explain why Grasping Vines contributes to D?
All right, so a big part of D is so we'll talk about this when we're looking at the numbers is how well you can go through your deck and or how much time you have to do so.
Right,
So the most obvious one is the faster I draw cards, the faster I discard cards from hand, the faster I archive cards from hand, the more cards I'm drawing from my 36 card deck. So that's one aspect. That's the easier one to conceptualize. The other one is having time to go through my deck. So one thing that gives me time to go through my deck is that my opponent um, has to be slowed down going through their deck because that's in effect giving me more time to get through my 36 cards because it's taking them more time to get through their
so
36
so
cards. So
D
grasping
could
vines,
D could also kind of be. I mean, I guess that in some ways you could think of that as like dirtling, right? Like you have the ability. Like I mean, that's I just thought of that, but it's kind of like that's obviously only a very small part of D, but your ability to
yeah,
stall, right? To
yeah,
to 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 give
that's the
yourself
other
more time.
aspect of it.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean to
We
just
we must, yeah. So I guess we did skip P. We'll come back to that in a second, but
No, it's at the bottom.
Oh
D's at the
no, it's
bottom.
the next one. It's
Yeah,
after D.
yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. That was in the chat. All right, so but basically D is being able to draw faster or prevent your opponent from drawing from their deck as quickly. It's the time mechanism of the game, one way or the other. I have felt from the experience of my 1,000+ games that the D that I look for, and this is not like a minimum for me, but this is my favorite mechanism. This is my second most important mechanism because I feel like it affects my ability to access my deck in all of its entirety, reduces what a lot of players call as variance.
Hmm.
Variance is just how are you getting the cards you need at the right time? Are you going to see all the cards that make your win condition? At a D of 9, I've felt in most competitive games, I see the majority to all of my deck. Um, that allows me to have a very large level of familiarity with what's going to happen each game. Knowing I'm going to see those cards means I can plan out strategies for almost every game because that's going to happen. Whether the D is getting there through either archiving, drawing more cards, slowing my opponent down so I can set them up, doesn't really matter in some extent. Obviously, certain D is better than other D, but in the sum of things, if you see a D of 9, for the most part, you're looking at a deck that will generally allow you the capacity to see most of its cards in most games.
That's fair. And then you have like an excellent example of a card that's going to have a very substantial D rating in the new set. You probably
Yes.
know where I'm going.
Yep.
You know
the
where I'm
other
going.
reason why the other reason why Heart of the Forest will immediately become a viable
Right.
card.
This is going to be an absolute house in the new set. This is a thing that for Magic, we've kind of taken amongst our team to calling this a Wheel of Fortune. Some people understand the reference, some people don't. That was a card in Magic the Gathering that basically did this. But printing this, first of all, printing this as an action without
Mm-hmm.
an Omega or without
Yep.
an Alpha or an
Or
Omega,
chains. They could have had
no
chains easily.
chains,
This
no
is
alpha
easily
effect,
worth
no
some
omega.
chain.
Right, no alpha effect, no omega effect. What this literally, although if you this card would be a lot less overpowered if it gave you chains and it gave you chains first, right? So if the card said gain 3 chains or gain 2 chains and then had this effect,
Mm-hmm.
then refilling your hand as if it were the end of the turn would actually only refill your hand to like 5 cards, for
No matter
example.
what. Yep.
Right, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what. So that would be more balanced. That is not what this card is. It is definitely ridiculous because the ideal scenario would be that you're cycling through your like this works amazing in a lot of decks, but it works very good in combo decks where you would have a
Oh yeah.
thing where right where you want even a higher level than maybe what you would normally want. You would want a higher level of D because you're looking through all the cards in the deck and you're trying to find the pieces, right? You're trying to find combo pieces. That's what you want to get to.
Well, I
Um,
think the real power of this card is like I'm not like let's ignore Heart of the Forest. Like first of all, this card, like inside of an Untamed turn, you can play if you're calling Untamed, you should have 3 to 4 cards of Untamed in your hand. You play them all, then you play this card. You discard however many you have left, draw 6 more, and you're probably going to play 2 to 3 more Untamed cards in that turn. And then you're going to draw 2 to 3 more cards out of your
right,
deck.
right,
So let's think about the numbers there. Like if this was just turn 3 of the game,
right.
you're about to move through your deck potentially 8 to 10 cards.
Yes,
So on turn 3, deep diving 8 to 10 cards further into your deck than your opponent is a ridiculous amount of just getting 2 different cards in your deck that you know you want to see.
right.
Like
And you
that's
can
not
do
even
this
something that Coda has right now,
right.
unless they got Seed on turn 1 and played
And
LA.
this is also, and we won't dwell on this card a lot longer, but just to point out one other thing about this card is a combo killer, right?
Yes.
Because if your opponent is setting up some sort of LAC turn or whatever, and you sense that they're like, they drop seed, and you see them like only play one other card, and they draw up and pretty clear they're about to go off. Um,
Like
you
LA is the most obvious one because you can talk about like you can kind of identify when they're going to be holding it.
right,
But I think the other ones that are like more important because of how people play the game right now. How many people have bait and switch in their hand
right,
all the
and just and
time?
chain themselves by holding it for
Yeah,
forever, and then
like
all
they just have it. Like
right,
they just don't play it. Like
and the
okay, you're gonna hold bait. I have 12 amber because I played in Untamed, punctuated
right,
equilibrium.
exactly. Like Untamed is
Like
a great house for this card because to get rid of that scenario because they're waiting for you to call Untamed if they've seen your house card, and
mm-hmm.
and know that you're gonna run up like 15 amber, 12 amber, whatever it is, and
Oh, and
then you pitch their ability to deal with it.
I also I was talking to someone else about some other fun things because Coda has some big Arise turns. Like if you see that they're low in their deck, and you know your opponent has a Rise and they have less than 6 cards left in their draw pile, you could play this and just completely screw their Arise turns. Oh, they have Witch
Yeah,
of the Eye, same thing. You could reset their deck when they don't want that to happen.
right,
So there's a
right.
lot of power in this card.
There's
This
gross stuff,
card is
and like
probably one of the best actions in AOA from what I've seen. It might be one of the best actions in the whole game.
yeah,
I don't.
and like Chad is mentioning, I mean, you could if they're running like if you're playing against Bombfoot,
Mm-hmm.
for example, and they haven't played any Control of the Weeks and they haven't called Dis in a while, and you think they might be waiting to do that, you can hit them and pitch all that fun stuff. So there's a lot of fun utility to that card.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one example of a prime deck manipulation card for
True.
sure.
Very true.
And then we arrive at P, which is effective creature power. And this is usually close to a combination of the power of the creature and any of the armor the creature might have. Some
True.
form of that, but there are notable exceptions to this in terms of cards that affect power on the board. Um, that's
Yeah, I'm
probably
not going to really get into those, but for the most part, yes, the creature it is the exact sum. When I'm evaluating decks and I'm looking for competitive decks, I don't actually use the sum P or the P score that is shown to you.
Mhm.
So on the right, if you scroll a little bit, you see the little pie chart. I do use creature count. Creature count's very important because it's obviously the number of creatures you have in play, the number of things they have to address. Generally, I've settled around a Coda deck of looking between 15 and 18 creatures to be effective. Below that, you run into a real problem with just having board presence and anything you hitting the board just dying immediately. And honestly, above 18, Coda actions are so good that's an opportunity cost for me. If I have more than 18 creatures, am I really just playing them to come back to them 3 turns later and they might not be there? I would rather have actions from those other 18 cards than another 2 creatures. AOA, I can't really comment on the creature number at this point. I think the number for the ideal deck might actually end up being higher than the 15 to 18, but it's real hard to say. The repate is a really hard thing to quantify, so we're going to see what
Right.
that looks like in the future. But right now, I'm pretty happy with my original evaluation of 15 to 18. If you want below 15 creatures, I think you can do it. There are decks out there, but they need to have pretty solid recursion, maybe multiple regrowths, a rise. A
Right.
rise alone can do it in a lot of decks. But some other mechanism to fill up the board where you just end up, playing one creature at a time. When you do play a creature, and it get murdered immediately.
Right.
Um,
I was trying to remember how many. Bahamut is 16, so I thought that might have been an example. But
yeah,
yeah,
it's right in the sweet spot. I think Bombfoot had 18 or 19. I
18.
think
Yeah.
18. Yeah, so both of them are right on the money with where I want my creatures. I didn't actually write anything about this in my original article, but I personally hate upgrades. I prefer to see the 0 that I'm seeing here with Bombfoot. I'm
Mhm.
not saying there aren't great upgrades in this
I
game,
think
but
yeah. I mean, things like you don't really hate seeing something like Collar of Subordination.
yeah,
Um,
that's different. I count that as a creature. Like
yeah,
I
no, I mean
literally just
it's
quantify that
right,
as a creature for me.
right,
But like every upgrade outside of that one, like some of them are great. Like Armageddon Cloak is a great upgrade, but there are a lot of other cards I'd rather see than that card. As
yeah,
great as it is, like Dusk Runner is obviously an amazing upgrade, but still, I would rather just have an urchin. Really would. I know that sounds a little weird off the cuff, but I would take an urchin over Dusk Runner any day.
Yeah. So
So
after you've gone through, you look at all these numbers. I mean, all the numbers. So all the numbers add up, and P is, I don't know the exact formula, but obviously, unlike the other numbers, P is not a summation of all of the individual
hmm
relative power of all the creatures. It's calculated using a different formula that tries to normalize it
yeah,
to the scale that A, E,
it's
R, and C and D go.
yeah, it's 1/10 of the actual P of the creature.
Right.
So
So when you add all those numbers up, you get an arc. And
hmm
I'm trying to remember if you said anything specifically as to like an
I
overall
did
arc that you know that you like, or
more of the community uses the sum arc than me, but I will go speak to their viewpoint. So a lot of them are saying like above 60 arc, you're probably looking at a lot of elements that this game wants to accomplish. Above 65, it's really hard for that deck to not be serviceable at some level of competitive play.
right,
And I don't know if I've actually seen any false negatives that hit 70 or not. A false negative is like something that metrically looks like it should be good, but it's not. It's hard to get a 70 arc period. So if you're looking at a 70 arc deck, you probably have something that can just win a lot of games because obviously the arc comes from stuff that you want to do in the game.
right.
Just to get to 70 means that a lot of the cards that you have in the deck do a lot of things that you need to do in the game.
Fun counterexample that I just pulled up. I searched for what's the lowest. I'm kind of surprised by this. I tried to find arc minimum arc of 70 and the lowest SAS deck, and this is it. It's kind of
Yeah,
funny.
this deck can definitely win games.
I know, but it's funny because it's 67 SAS and like it is 10 creatures, right? It's three
Yep.
upgrades, four artifacts. It'll win some games, but this is a good example of like arc isn't the end all be all,
No.
but by the same token, so yeah, so the arc in many ways can be more important than
Yeah,
the
the 10
SAS.
creatures here is real rough. You
Yeah,
have the 8 in here because the reason why the SAS is so low is because a lot of low value cards here.
right. You have
Um,
a lot of cards that aren't likely to be super useful,
you have
and you
Psychic
also
Network that's hitting no creatures.
right.
I mean, like, that's what's going on here.
So we haven't gotten to this, but this is a good time to talk about it. So the SAS rating itself, ARC is an independent rating system that is completely different than SAS. Like obviously, if there was ever a deck that proved it, this is the deck. That you can have a deck that has 71 ARC, and you can have a deck that is 71 ARC but has something astronomically low for a deck that has 71 ARC. It's only slightly below average. Well, it's actually probably a full standard deviation below average.
I think
67
the average
SAS.
is around 74.
Yeah, so it's probably a standard deviation below average. But for 71 arc, that's just ridiculous. But the way that it's calculated is each card has a base SAS card rating. So if you open a deck in the detailed view and you scroll down here, you could see that it has a base SAS rating, like Bait and Switch is a 4. They're 0 to 4. So 4 is the highest. Fagin is a 3, and then Nature's Call is a 4, and you go on down from there all the way down to things like Psychic Network is a 1. I
It
don't.
is important to note there are very few fours.
There are very few 4s. That's absolutely correct. So there's a Nature's Call, Bait and Switch. I don't. There are maybe a couple more off the top of my head, but I can't remember. And then you get down to things like Marauder, which is clearly the best creature of all time. I don't care what
Oh my
Z
god.
tells you.
Shut up.
And Mother Gun
Garbage.
and Niffle-Ape and that sort of stuff. Those are all very bad. So you figure out the SAS rating of all of these cards. You add that all up. That gets your base card rating up here. And then you're going to add synergy and anti-synergy values. And the way Nathan set it up is he has categorical synergy is probably the best way to describe it. With only a few exceptions, and he's done stuff like Pawn Sacrifice synergizes specifically with Urchin, which is good because that's like one of the best Pawn Sacrifice targets that exist. But then a lot of other synergies are things like Bait and Switch. It synergizes well with things which increase key cost, right? So Miasma, or I think he probably classifies Miasma under this, Miasma, or a Grabber Jammer, or a Jammer Pack like this deck has, right? It's good because you hold your opponent off for longer, and then the Bait and Switch hits for a lot more. So you have categorical synergies like that in terms of how it works. And then you have anti-synergies, of course. And part of the reason why this deck has such a low SAS is because it only has 5 synergy and 13 anti-synergy. And anti-synergy are exactly what you would expect. They're the yellow ones here. That relate to um, they relate to things that you don't like seeing when you see this card in your deck. Like, so a Jammer Pack. Jammer Pack is a very good card, generally speaking, if you have targets for the thing that are going to survive, right? So if you have high-powered creatures, elusive creatures, but mostly high-powered creatures that are going to survive, if you stick a Jammer Pack on them, then Jammer Pack can be very, very good. But this has an anti-synergy with this deck because this deck has overall low total creature power, which means you have a lot of cards like sticking a jammer pack on an urchin, for example, is terrible. I mean, if you have to do it to save yourself for a turn, you do it, but you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to stick a jammer pack on a Fagin. You want to stick it on like a Dominator or something of that nature. This deck is bad for many reasons. I mean, it can win games, but it's bad from an elite competitive perspective for many reasons, not the least of which is that you only have 2 creatures in Mars, and they're both power 2 creatures. And Blip literally only works on 1 creature in the deck, and that's the Marauder, which
awful.
is stupid dumb. But that's an example of an anti-synergy. Like, Poison Wave is really bad in this deck because it kills all of your Mars cards, Urchin. It almost kills Faggot and Nexus. It kills a whole bunch of other things. So the synergy values you can kind of see are all down here. You scroll down and look and see what kind of synergistic values is this column right here that's added or subtracted. And then once you get the card rating, the synergy, the anti-synergy, you come up with a SAS rating. And that is the number that's in bold and depicted and everyone refers to. A lot of people refer to the ARC as well. But you're more commonly when you're at your local game store, if someone opens a deck and shorthand explanation, they says, "Oh, it was really bad. It was like a 52 SAS or something, some historically low SAS number." And I mean, I think it's fair to say that you and I both agree, and Nathan surely agrees that SAS is not the end all, be all in terms of consideration for a deck. There are lots of decks, especially combo decks and that sort of thing, that are not captured by SAS. But that are not completely captured by SAS, right? If you have a deck that's primarily a combo, it's not entirely captured by SAS. But outside of those like corner cases, SAS does a pretty good job of giving you some indication of whether or not a deck's going to be decent or not.
Yeah, for me personally, for SAS, like it's hard for me to like if SAS gives me red flag type stuff. If I see a SAS below 75, that means either the card ratings aren't quite there, so I really need to look at it to see if there's some kind of other thing going on in the deck that is making the deck better, even though it's lacking obvious card value. But for the most part, for my evaluations, a lot of the decks that are below 75 that are competitively viable are just pure combo. They just have certain cards that really combo off of each other well. So if they don't have that, I really don't invest my time in them. The best thing that I can say to do with the measurements and the metrics that we talked about today is if you only have 3 decks, just play all of them a bunch. That is way better than what we've talked about of doing.
Right.
But let's say you have 50 decks. You're obviously not going to sit down and play all 50 decks 35 times. Like that's just not a thing. Like we don't have that time. But so these metrics can help that. If you have 50 decks, you have 100 decks, you can use these metrics to kind of give you a feel of what these decks do and which ones you're going to invest your time in it. Because in the end of the day, like I said this very clearly in my article, nothing replaces playing the deck as far as the value of the deck.
Right.
Nothing nothing will.
And you're going to find things, especially when there's a new set coming out. You're going to find things like one of the best decks I have. I didn't realize that there were combos in the deck until I played it like for the 7th or 8th time, and then I said, "Oh wow, these are things that are amazing if you do them and set them up correctly." But there are going to be a lot of those experiences that people have with AOA where because it's a completely new set and there are all sorts of new mechanics, and we also have never no person here. I think probably, unless like some person opened an AOA deck and went home and played it against someone across the table, other than that, no person in the universe to date that doesn't work for FFG has ever played an AOA deck against a Coda deck. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know. We can guess and we can make predictions and we can hypothesize and strategize. But Z's right. We don't know how these decks are going to interact with each other completely, and there are going to be things that we don't realize. Um, and the only way to discover those things is to actually play the matches and get a feel, at least for the different cards and what they do in the archetypes and combos. And I mean, we're still fighting. I mean, like Nathan was telling me, he was playing a deck the other day, and he discovered a combo. Like, and all of us on the team have played not quite as many as Z, but we've all played hundreds of games, and we're still discovering things about it. Like Nathan found a combo the other day where there was a deck he was playing that had Dominator, Bobble, Control the Weak, and Novu Archaeologist, and that was like kind of an infinite combo loop that I think he was playing with Luke, and Luke did that to him or something, where he was Dominator, Bobble, play Control the Weak, Dominator, Bobble to use Archaeologist, archive Control the Weak, repeat. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's just random things like that you might not even see the first 25 times you played a deck. But there's all sorts
For
of
sure.
stuff you can only discover by playing the deck. So play the deck. But
Which
if
is
you're
why,
yeah,
starting Thursday, I'm going to go to. I have a sealed event scheduled for Thursday night, Friday night, 2 on Saturday, and 1 on Sunday. Because that's how you learn. You play in real environments. So get out to the locals and play as much sealed as you can. If they're not running a sealed, call them up and ask them to.
and I mean, well, first of all, it doesn't sound like you're like a fan of this game at all or anything like that, or have some sort of addiction that we need to discuss. But no, but I
I
mean,
know what you're talking
I
about.
think uh, most of the people that are listening probably right now, or that eventually listen to this video, are probably pretty envious of your situation. I know I am, because I mean, I've now moved to a major city, but when I was living in a smaller city, I was lucky if I had one sealed event every 3 weeks. So if you do have a local game store, a local Keyforge scene that has uh, routine tournaments, by all means, take advantage of that. Play vicariously for the people that can't go to local game stores, every week. But you are absolutely correct, Z, that there is really no substitute for sealed experience, and you saw that a lot. I mean, I did. I don't know about you, but I saw that a lot when we just played in
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta and we played in Seattle. Right, that it makes a huge difference if you do not have experience playing sealed in terms of your ability to analyze and select a deck.
Yeah.
Um, and also in your ability to anticipate threats that you don't see in advance. Like, because you literally can't read the Archon cards, so you can say, well, these are all the possible threats in the house. Which of those things do I care about? We can all think about playing against bait and switch when they're playing shadows, but there's so many more other cards, especially
Mm-hmm.
now, that you're gonna have to be careful. So there is no substitute for real world experience for sure.
Yeah. And for example, one of the games I played, I was playing against Sanctum, so I kept checking at 6. I literally like stopped from
Right?
reaping with one of my guys, and
Try
in
and
the end,
dodge
my
doorstep.
opponent did. Well, no,
Yeah,
my opponent did have. Oh, doorstep would have still hit me at 6, but my opponent did have gatekeeper. It's like
gatekeeper.
there
Right.
you go. This is like, I mean, you just learn. Like you play more games. Specifically, you play it like if you want to get better at a sealed vault tour, you got to go play sealed events. It is not the same as playing Archon, so it's not the same as playing in Crucible. Like, and if you, the best you could possibly do is play on Crucible with a random deck, and then don't look at your opponent. Yeah, you're probably gonna lose most of those games, but that will still give you experience.
Right.
Which is
And
how I prepared for Atlanta, and I went 6-0 day one. So I mean, it worked. So I mean, you
hashtag
just
humble
got you.
brag. Yes.
I mean, you gotta play the game, and like that's the only
Yeah.
thing I could think of that would prepare me the best.
No,
And the
that
other
is
thing
true. That is
we
true.
did
There's
is
not
like we
there
yeah
there's not any sport or any other competition where people would think that it would be a viable method of preparation and training to just sit around and talk about it for forever. Like there's no one in the NBA finals that's just sitting around and and just like talk, literally no practice whatsoever, just talking about basketball theory or anything like that. You got
yeah
to get in there. You got to get practice with playing stuff that you've never seen before. because that is exactly what you'll be doing. And yeah, maybe if you make day two, by the time you get to day two, you'll understand your deck better. But you got to make it to day two, right?
Yeah, for
You
sure.
got to, like, under the current format, you can't have more than one loss on day one, which means that your one loss on day one, and I'll talk about this more in a different video, but if you have to go 5-1 out of tournament to advance, you need to save that loss for random things you can't control, because there are going to be enough of those that you're going to run the risk of getting way more than one loss for that. You can't have the one loss be unforced based on a mistake that you have, right? You have to save those. That one loss is precious, and that one loss must be earmarked for variance, for things that you don't have any control over, your opponent top decking the exact answer. Because if you don't save it for things like that, and you spend your loss as a currency, you spend it on, um,
Mistakes.
yeah, on mistakes, then you have zero margin of error. And at the Vault Tour, this is becoming increasingly more true. The more we play this game, the more the game is played by everybody. Um, at the Vault Tour, it's a situation where you have more and more players that know what they're doing and are good at this game, and you cannot count on. You just can't count on nothing bad ever happening to you. Like, you have to plan for that. So you
Well,
gotta
on
have
that
practice.
note, as we're kind of wrapping things up,
Yeah.
another big suggestion I want to give to people is like if you're playing and you're playing at a level that you're going to start attending vaults, at least the 10 games leading up to the vault, if you play them in person, and when you make a mistake, let it stand. Like
Hmm.
it's okay if you're in your local or whatever, and your opponent does something and you want to give them grace. But if you are personally preparing for a vault and you make a mistake, like you call the wrong house, you fight it into elusive creature, let it stand. It's better for you to lose that game than to
Yes.
take it back. Because like I'm not going to get into the psychology behind this because that's actually my degree, but you will remember that when it matters the most if you let it stand and you lost a tournament because of it.
Yes. I will never forget. I will never forget a grabber jammer effect for the rest of my life. That's an
Yeah.
entirely different story and video about my experience in Seattle. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, I make a habit of doing that whenever I'm playing. Um, Games in preparation or games against people that matter. Like you said, local game stores will totally, someone else who's, especially if it's a person who's learning whatever, makes some mistake, like, and they're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, do something else. Like, if I'm not in the main event of a vault tour, I'll 100% of the time let
Yeah,
them
and I
let
do
them
that now at my local too. Like I've
right.
won enough local tournaments. I don't care if I win on any given day when I go to a local tournament. That's fine. I let them take back everything. I tell them what that like if they forget to reap, like you like before they say I pass or whatever, like you sure you want to reap with this guy?
Right.
Like if they forget they have settle all, like you're gonna use that. Like I want to play against my opponent at their best,
Right.
even if they're not quite there yet, because the odds that they played as many games of me is
Zero.
almost zero,
Pretty
right?
sure it's zero unless you have, like, random people like Dave Cordiero showing up at your local game store. But yes, probably zero.
So
Yeah.
like I do all that for them, and I make sure that I not only address game state for my opponent, I help them to play as optimally as I can from the other side of the table. But if I do any of those mistakes that I just said, like I let them stand. Like that's I would rather go 3-1, 2-1, whatever, than win the tournament because I need to get better. If I'm thinking about being a vault player, obviously I am thinking about being a vault player.
I mean, you're
Uh,
kind of. I mean, to be fair, you're kind of thinking about it. I mean,
yeah,
you'll
yeah,
probably
I'm
get
doing
there
my best.
sometime. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I show up, I play the game.
Right.
Sometimes the cards work my way.
Sometimes.
Uh,
Yeah. Every now and then. Every now and then. That's true. But yeah,
mhm.
you're right. You have to take the punishment. Like, you have to self-impose
Yeah,
punishment upon yourself.
yeah.
You know,
Your
that's the only
brain
way.
will not
Yeah.
remember it when it matters if you constantly let the mistakes get fixed. So you need your brain to do what it does best and remember the pain of losing. So you need to lose when you make those mistakes. That is the best way to get better if you're talking about going to a vault and all of those mistakes stand. Period. They just do. Like if either a person says that's okay, go back and fix it, both players, if the judges were to find out about it, can be they can get a warning, and then if it happens again, you can be DQ'd from the tournament.
Yeah, it's. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't expect that your opponent, like, because both of us, Z and I, are very nice guys, but, like, there's not a scenario I think that we would even consider in a Vault Tour main event. Vault Tour main event. There's not a scenario we would even consider like allowing takebacks. If it's a mandatory trigger, that's a whole other conversation. But like, if it's a line of play
Yes,
issue,
that's different.
right? If it's a line of play issue where someone has made a decision and they've changed their decision midway through because they realized it was a bad decision. I mean, that's at the Vault Tour level. Like that doesn't work. Like it's one like if you're playing golf with your buddies and your buddies like their hand slips and the club hits the ball but not very well and they're like, "Hey, can I just hit that shot over again?" Like, absolutely, if you want to do that, feel free to let them do that. But like no one on the PGA Tour is getting do-overs, right? Like that's not a
No,
thing that's not a
no,
thing that exists. So
no.
like if you're playing at the elite level of anything, you have to understand that everything you do matters, and it's not about being mean or being unkind. It's about like that's the only way that you can fairly determine like who's supposed to win something, like or at least come closely to fairly determining that, right? To make it a fair playing field. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up this particular
My closing
conversation?
thoughts is when we saw the first 100 cards of AOA, I was not impressed. I was thought Coda's just gonna come in and curb stomp all these decks.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm sitting at about 30 cards that I'm like, man, I want to get these cards in my hand, and I want to do some amazing things. So I'm super excited about Thursday. Yes, I know a lot of Canadians have a bunch of them right now.
Right.
So I'm super happy for them. Yeah, not maybe. That they have them early. But yeah, once we all get them in play, we're gonna do some fun stuff. We're gonna forge keys in ways we've never seen before, i.e.,
We're
key
gonna
cheats that are
we're,
really
we're
weird.
gonna stop forging keys in ways we've never
We're
seen
gonna
before.
see some
Yeah.
games go to time in very strange situations, and that's why I love this game. Like there are more win conditions in this game than any other card game that I've played. I didn't play a lot of the non-magic stuff when I was a kid, but like the way the game is designed means that there's literally limitless possibilities for the future. I have a feeling that key color is going to come in one day. Like my closing note is that I'm excited more now than ever about Keyforge, and as Eric alluded to earlier, there aren't that many people that are more obsessed with this game than me already. So
Right.
yeah, just keep forging keys and enjoy the Crucible.
All right. Thank you, Z, for joining us. Stay tuned to the channel. We'll have some more instructional videos, theory videos. We'll be doing some playtesting. We're gonna throw a lot of stuff in here, but I wanted to start out or have one of the first videos I put up here be talking with someone who's very knowledgeable about the game and talking about Decks Keyforge, because that is the site we are affiliated with, but also specifically about how to look at decks and think about their component parts. So I'll be referring back to this video a lot in the future, but I wanted to establish a baseline. So thank you, Z, for coming on. Thank you,
No problem, man.
Thank you for internets for watching, and we will see you on the battlefield.